Hello and welcome to the second part of the GSpawn intro tutorials. In the previous video we talked about modular environments. Now in this video I'm going to show you how to build a simple outdoor environment. So I'm going to discuss about the props spawn tool, curve spawn and physics spawn, and we're also going to talk about object groups. So I already have the plugin initialized, and I'm going to be using a pack called Fantastic Village Pack by Tidal Flask Studios. And I'm going to drag and drop this right here. I'm going to drag and drop this folder right here in the Prefab Library Manager. And I'm using a demo scene that actually comes with this package. I've erased all the objects and I just left the terrain so that I can show you how to populate this terrain with objects. Okay, so we're going to start off with props spawn, and I'm going to click on this button right here to enable it, and I'm going to go to buildings, and I'm going to lay down a bunch of houses first. So let's go ahead. I'm just gonna double click on this guy, and if I hold down the shift key I can rotate it, and I can also hold down Ctrl key and scale it like this. And sometimes if you find your objects floating above the ground, or if you just want to raise it up, you can hold down the Alt key and move the mouse to embed it, or just move it upwards. Now most of the times you will want to embed stuff instead of making them float above the ground. Okay. I can press R to reset the vertical offset, and I'm also going to press Y to reset the rotation back to 0, and O to reset the scale. And I'm just going to use the Y key to rotate around the Y axis and place this house over here. I'm going to place another one here, here, and let's see, maybe another one over here. And that's about it for now. Yeah, so we could go on and add a bunch more, but I'm just gonna leave it like this for now. I'm gonna switch to selection mode. I'm gonna select one of these houses, press Shift A to select all the houses, and then I'm gonna use the prefab replacement strategy that we talked about in the previous video. So I'm gonna select a bunch of prefabs in the prefab manager, and then I'm gonna hold down Ctrl Alt and left click on one of the selected prefabs, and this will instantiate different kinds of houses. Okay, so next what we want to do is actually let's actually rotate some of these. I'm going to select this guy and press Y to rotate it. Okay, that looks much better to me. Okay, so now what I would like to do is I want to surround this area. Notice that we have this dirt road here, and what we're going to do is we're going to surround this dirt road with a wooden fence, a wooden wall. So we're going to use the curve spawn functionality for that. I'm going to click on this curve button, and let's talk about a few things here. Notice that we have a bunch of settings here. Now these settings are curve settings that apply when you create a new curve. Yeah, so before you can use the curve spawn, you need to set up these settings and then click on the create curve button to actually create a curve. And the created curve will initially use the settings that you specify here. Now, because you might have different categories of curves, for example, some curves may spawn fences, other curves may spawn trees, other curves may spawn houses, for example. You have the possibility of organizing these settings in different profiles. Yeah, so we can click on this create new profile button right here, and I know that the first type of curve that the first category of curves that I'm gonna be working with is walls. So I'm gonna say walls. Click on create, and then notice that we have a new walls profile here. Now let's actually go ahead and notice that we have this field here called curve prefab profile. So the curve prefab profile is a prefab profile that holds the prefabs that will be spawned along the curve. So let's go ahead and go to Tools, GSpawn Windows, and select and click on Curve Prefabs. We get this new window. I'm gonna put it right over here, and let's actually populate this with prefabs. I'm gonna go to Props, and I'm gonna search for wall. And this is what I want. This is the prefab that I'm looking for. So I'm gonna drag and drop this right here on the left side. Actually, no. I'm gonna delete this, and I'm gonna create a new profile. I'm gonna call it wood wall. Click on create, and then I'm gonna drag and drop this prefab right over here. Okay, and now I'm gonna specify the curve prefab profile to, I'm gonna set it to wood wall. Another thing that I'm gonna do is I'm gonna set the projection mode to terrains. So what this does is when you move the control points of the curve around, it will ensure that the objects are always projected on top of the terrain surface, because sometimes it may happen that when you move the control points of the curve, some of the control points will float above the ground, and that means that some of the objects will also be floating above the ground. So this will ensure that the objects are they sit nicely on top of the terrain. Okay, now I'm going to give this curve a name, and I'm going to call it wall. I'm going to click on create curve, and notice it added a new item here in this list. It says wall. Yeah, this is our curve. And if we look below, we can see that we have the same settings that we have here. We also have them here. So the difference between these settings is that the settings here below apply to the selected curves, the curves that you have selected. Yeah. So when you create a curve using these settings, you can then change the settings of each individual curve using the settings below. Now in this particular case, we want to leave it like this. Notice when I move the mouse in the scene, after you create a curve, after you press the create curve button, when you move the mouse in the scene, you get this green dot. And this green dot suggests that you are currently creating the curve, and this is the current control point. So I'm going to left click, move the mouse, left click again to add a new control point, and so on. And we're going to go all the way back here. And when I'm done, I can hold down the shift key and left click to commit. Okay, now I can of course move these control points around. Now because we're using projection, because we have projection mode set to terrains, I'm going to click on this prefab, and I'm going to uncheck align up axis when projected. Yeah. If you have this checked, whenever the objects will be projected on the terrain, their up axis will be aligned to the terrain surface. Sometimes this is something that you want, but sometimes it's not. Like in this case, we don't want that to happen, so I'm just going to uncheck this. Also, what we need to talk about is the up axis and forward axis. So the up axis is simply the axis, the local axis of the prefab that points upwards, that is perpendicular to the curve, and in this case it's the y-axis. We also have the forward axis, which is the axis that will be aligned with the direction in which the curve is moving. So by default this is set to longest, and this is usually what you want for for walls and fences and stuff like that. If we change this, for example, to shortest, this is what would happen. So I'm gonna leave this to longest, and that looks okay. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to actually duplicate this curve. So make sure that the curve is selected inside this list. Also make sure the scene view has focus. You can do this by just clicking inside the scene view. Then press CTRL D. So once I do that, notice that it created a new curve. And now I'm going to press CTRL A to select all the curve control points. I'm going to use the move gizmo to move the curve somewhere around here. I'm going to press E to rotate, to enable the rotation gizmo and rotate the curve something like this. Now I'm going to press W to enable the move gizmo again, and I'm going to put the I'm going to move it like right over here. Now we're going to make some necessary adjustments to make sure that it's following this dirt road. Okay. Now, when you need more control, what you can do is you can add a new control points. If I press C on the keyboard, and if I move the mouse close to one of these curve segments, a white dot will appear. If I left click, it will add a new control point in that spot. Okay, there you go. So now we have a bunch of walls surrounding this little village of ours. Let's go ahead and create another curve that will add a bunch of fences. We're going to use it to add fences. So I'm going to create a new profile, and I'm going to call it fence. Create. And I'm going to search for fence. Okay. I'm gonna drag and drop this prefab right here, and I'm also gonna drag and drop these two guys. So we can have more than one prefab inside a curve. You're not limited to one prefab. You can actually have more than one prefab inside a curve, and you can use this spawn chance value to control how often those prefabs will be picked. So notice we have a normal fence here, and then we have two damaged versions of the fence. So I want these two damaged versions to have a smaller spawn chance. This one like 0.2, and this maybe 0.03, I guess. We'll see. We'll probably have to change this. Okay, now I'm gonna create a new profile, settings profile here. I'm gonna create a new profile. I'm gonna call it fences create, and I'm gonna specify the curve prefab profile. I'm gonna say it's fence. Okay, now what we can do, and we also have to set the projection mode to terrains. I mean, we don't have to, but it's useful to have this set to terrains. And I'm gonna specify the name of the new curve that I'm about to create. I'm gonna call it fence create curve. And let's see, I think we're gonna go over in this direction. Yeah, that's about it. Okay, so notice that some of these prefabs use the damaged versions. Now currently we have a small spawn chance. Let's actually increase the spawn chance for this guy, for example. Now when you change these settings here, the entire curve, the curve will have to respawn all the objects, and it will rearrange them. So notice that now we get a lot more of these damaged versions here and here. This one's actually quite low, maybe 0.08. Okay, something like that. Now it actually disappeared now, 0.01. Okay, that looks better. We can actually make some changes here. Okay, now with fences, what you might want to do is you might want to randomize their rotation along the forward axis. So we have here this field called randomized forward axis rotation. So if I click on this, actually I'm going to select all the prefabs, yeah, because I want to specify the same settings for all of them. So I'm going to click this, and notice what will happen is that the prefabs will suddenly start leaning either to the left or to the right of the forward direction. Yeah, so we have here a minimum rotation and maximum rotation currently set to 15. You can play around with these values, and yeah, it currently seems a little bit too much. So I'm going to set this -10 and 10. Yeah, so this looks much nicer. And you can also randomize the up axis rotation. The up axis rotation is the rotation around the perpendicular axis that sits on top of the curve. Yeah, the kind of like the fence up axis. So that also seems to add a little bit of variation here, which I kind of like. Okay, so this is our fence. We could go on and create another one over here, but I'm just gonna leave it like this for now. And let's also now create a curve that will. So up until this point, we have created curves that contain only a single lane. So there's only a single chain of objects that move along the curve, but you can actually have more than one lane. So let me show you an example of this with trees. I'm going to create a new profile. I'm going to call it trees create. I'm going to go to environment, eliminate the name filter, and I'm going to drag and drop this tree prefab right over here. And let's go ahead and create a new settings profiles. Let's call it trees. Trees. Project on terrains, and let's give the curve a name. Trees create curve, and we're gonna spawn these trees right here behind the wall. Okay, so first of all, I'm gonna uncheck align up axis when projected, and notice what happens. What happens is that these trees they don't look right? This is not how trees are supposed to sit on the ground, and the reason why this happens is because the up axis, in this particular case for trees, the up axis, which is set to the y axis, matches the forward axis, because the longest axis of this prefab is actually the y-axis. So what we need to do is we need to change the forward axis to shortest. Okay, there you go. Now I'm gonna go to the settings below here. I'm gonna make sure that we have the trees curve selected, and here we have, you can see we have a field called num lanes. So this is the number of lanes. Currently it's set to 1, this is the default, so I'm gonna set this to, let's say, 3. And when I do that, notice that we have these trees running parallel to the curve, right? Now this doesn't really look like a forest. If you wanted to build a forest, probably a better tool would be the scatter brush, which has the possibility of adding more variation. With curves, it kind of looks uniform, as if these trees were planted or something like that. But there is actually a way to make this look a little bit more random. So let's go ahead and change the settings for this prefab. I'm gonna click on randomize scale, and I'm gonna set this to a minimum scale of, let's say, 0.6 and a maximum scale of 1.6. No, that's too big. 1.4. So already this looks a little bit better, yeah, because each tree has different scale. Now notice that when we move control points, the trees will have to be like their scale will be reset. This happens when you use random stuff, when you're working with random parameters. These things will have to be reset whenever you change the control point position. Okay, now what you can also do is you can play around with the settings. For example, you can specify a lane padding mode. Yeah, you can increase the distance between different lanes. Currently it's set to the lane padding mode. It's set to constant, which means that the constant value will always be used. But you can also specify a random value, and I'm going to use a maximum lane padding of, let's say, 5. And notice that suddenly it looks a bit more random. So I'm going to press CTRL A to select all the control points and move the gizmo. Yeah, so that they don't intersect with the trees, and maybe reduce this to 4. And yeah, this does look a little bit like a forest. Okay. Now, if we had more than one tree prefab, then we would have even more variation, and then we would definitely it wouldn't look uniform anymore. Okay, so the final thing that I would like to do with curve spawn is I want to place a bunch of houses maybe along in this direction. So let's go ahead and create a new profile, and I'm going to call it houses. And I'm going to go to buildings, and I'm going to pick this guy, and this guy, and I'm going to put them right over here and create a new profile. Now we don't need to actually create new profile. Let's just use the default profile, and I'm going to specify the curve prefab profile. I'm going to set it to houses, projection mode terrains, and then houses here. Create curve, and let's go ahead and place some houses over here in this direction. Now the first thing we have to do is we want to make sure that we uncheck align up axis when projected. And notice what happens is that, again, these houses don't look right at all. And when this happens, it means you need to play around with the up and forward axis. In this particular case, I'm pretty sure the up axis is the y axis, but the forward axis, I'm going to set it to shortest. And now it looks okay. Okay, now something that I don't like about this, we can actually go in this direction. I'm going to introduce a new control point here. Now, something I don't like about this is that the houses are sitting really close next to each other. So I'm going to make sure that the houses curve is selected, and I'm going to set the lane padding to something like well, normally it should no, not the lane padding. Actually, I want the padding value. We're using one lane in this case. I want the padding value here. I want to increase it. Yeah. And what I can also do, because currently the padding mode is set to constant, I can set this to random, and I can specify a minimum padding of, let's say, 2 and a maximum padding of, let's say, 5. All right. Okay, there you go. Now what I can do is I can let's just say that I don't want to make any more changes to this curve. I can actually delete the houses curve from this list by pressing delete or by pressing the X button right here. So I'm going to press this, and it says warning, this operation cannot be undone. Would you also like to delete the objects associated with the curve? I'm going to say no, and what this will do is it will delete the curve, but it will keep the objects. So now I can if I want to change these objects, I can just switch to selection mode, rotate them, move them up a little bit. Say this guy is a little bit too much embedded inside the terrain. Yeah, something like this. Yeah. So you can also use the curve spawn as a quick way to spawn objects, and then you can make changes with using selection mode. All right, so that's I think that should be it for curve spawn. Let's also talk about physics spawn. So physics spawn is useful when you wanna create debris or just piles of objects. So it uses, if I click on this physics spawn button, you can see it uses this concept of random prefab profile. So a random prefab profile is essentially a pool of prefabs that has where each prefab has a probability value associated with it. And when you move the mouse around and hold down the left mouse button, the plugin will randomly pick a prefab from this pool and it will add it to the physics simulation. So notice that we have this green circle, and which represents the drop area. Yeah, objects will be spawned randomly inside the circle and they will start falling on the ground. We also have a white line which indicates the drop height. You can hold down the shift key and use the mouse scroll wheel to change the drop height, and you can hold down Ctrl and use the mouse scroll wheel to change the drop area. Now let's go ahead and create this random prefab profile. So I'm going to go to Tools, GSpawn, Windows, Random Prefabs, and I'm going to create a profile called, let's say, props sim. Okay, stands for simulation. So I'm going to go to props, and I'm going to add a bunch of barrels. And I remember there were a bunch of wheels here. Okay, yeah, these guys. Okay, so let's use these guys to add a bunch of, let's say, some debris. And I'm gonna just make sure we have the random prefab profile set to props sim. And now what we can do, where should we add these? Let's add them here. Yeah, can do something like that, or somewhere behind the house. Yeah, these guys forgot to clean up. Now, notice that currently it's using real-time simulation. If you prefer, you can use the instant simulation. If you check instant here, what it will do is it will something like this, right? You can temporarily disable prefabs. So for example, at some point, if you wanted to stop spawning barrels, you could click the barrel prefab and uncheck used, and I will only spawn wheels. Yeah. And don't forget, you can change the probability value here. So if you wanna, currently they all have a probability value of 1, which kind of feels right in this case. But if you wanted to make sure that some prefabs get spawned more often than others, you can just decrease. For example, if I want these barrels to spawn more often than wheels, I can select the wheels and I can set the spawn chance value to 0.5. So now it spawns a lot more barrels than wheels. Okay. Now, the last thing that I would like to talk about is object groups. So up until this point, we've been placing objects at the scene root level. Now, for smaller scenes, this might be okay, but it's actually really useful to have these objects organized based on let's say, on the role that they play inside the scene, based on category. So you have to have a logical organization of the scene, and the way you can do that is using object groups. So essentially, an object group is, let me just open the object group window. I'm going to go to Tools, GSpawn, Windows, Object Group. So an object group is essentially just a regular game object that exists in the scene and that acts as a container for other objects. So you can associate an object group with a bunch of prefabs in the prefab manager. And what happens is that when a prefab is associated with an object group, whenever you spawn that prefab in the scene, it will be attached as a child to that object group, as a child of that object group. So let's go ahead and create an object group called houses. I'm using this prefix called OG_. This is not necessary. This is just a convention that I like to use for object groups, but you can name your object groups as you wish. Then I'm going to click on the plus sign, and notice we get this new object here called OG houses. And if you click on the yellow button, glowing yellow button, it will highlight the object inside the hierarchy view. So now what we need to do is we need to associate this prefab, these object groups, this object group that we created with the houses. So I'm going to select all the houses here, and I'm going to drag and drop I'm going to select all the houses in the prefab manager, and then I'm going to drag and drop the OG houses object group on top of these prefabs. And notice that when I do that, you get this text here, this label saying OG houses. This tells you that this prefab is associated with this object group. Alright, now, so from now on, if I spawn houses, they will automatically be attached as children of this object group. Now, what happens is we already have a bunch of houses spawned in the scene. So what do we do in this situation? Well, what we can do in this situation is, again, make sure we have these prefabs selected in the prefab manager, and click on this button here called Apply Object Group Links for Selected Prefabs. What this will do is it will attach all the instances of these prefabs, all the prefab instances in the scene. It will attach them to the associated object group. So if we look on under the OG houses, you can see that now it contains all the houses that we spawned earlier. And what we can do now, if we wanted to, we can, for example, we can click on the deactivate group button, and then we can activate them again. We can actually even delete by pressing this small X button here. All right, now let's go ahead and create a new object group called OG props. So I'm going to go to the props folder, press CTRL A, and then associate the object group with those prefabs, and click on Apply Object Group Links. And notice that OG props now contains all our props. So if we, yeah, there you go. And finally, we have the trees. So let's call this OG vegetation. OG vegetation, and I'm going to go to environment. I can drop this right here, and then apply links. Okay, so this is really much better. We have all the objects sitting under their parent. It's much easier to work with a scene that is organized like this than otherwise. Alright, so this is everything that I wanted to cover in this video. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye.